Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to our Fellows Public Talk. I'm Claudia Rizzini, the Executive Director of the Fellowship Program at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard. It is my pleasure to introduce Aruni Kashyap, our Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation Fellow. Assam, nestled in the northeastern region of India, harbors a wealth of culture and rich history. Aruni, equal parts fiction writer, poet, and translator, explores themes of identity and threats of erasure, making visible the state-sanctioned violence against rural indigenous communities in his birthplace and childhood home of Assam. His body of work articulates tensions between the personal and the public, and communal tensions among urban and agrarian, religious and secular communities. As a translator, Aruni works to bring canonical texts from Assamese women writers to the Anglophone world, enriching our understanding of Indian literature and bringing its regional perspectives into global conversations about migration and inequality. During his year at Radcliffe, Aruni aims to finish a draft of My Brother and the Fortune Tellers. This autofiction novel explores a family grappling with mental illness and their experience with indigenous healing modalities against the backdrop of widespread political violence in Assam. His book draws heavily from indigenous belief systems, including magic, chants, and divination, and is imbued with never-before-seen archival material. The Q&A portion of the public talk today will be moderated by Tracy K. Smith, Professor of English and African American Studies at Harvard University, and Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach Professor at Harvard Radcliffe Institute. And now please join me in welcoming Aruni Kashyap.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia, for the beautiful introduction. Every novel has a set of stories that don't make it into the book. My talk today is about those jilted, unconsoled stories, the stories behind the story. After that, I will read from the first chapter of my novel. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and attending my reading. My Brother and the Fortune Tellers is a novel set in Assam, northeast India, with a bloody armed insurgency against the central government as a backdrop. The novel is anchored in my experience of growing up with my brother's mental illness and my family's search for help from indigenous healers, fortune tellers, psychics, and mediums to find answers before and after his demise. The novel also highlights what it means to grow up under the duress of state violence and human rights violations committed by the Indian Army in the country's margins. This is largely a work of autofiction. My patron and uncle, my Bordota, who is the basis of a character in the novel, practiced sorcery and healing chants to earn a living and died a tragic, mysterious death in 1997. People in my village believe a demon killed him, and my uncle could no longer control him with his spells. My grandmother comes from Mayong, where every family practices magic, sorcery, and divination. Online articles about this place and documentaries erroneously describe it as a center for the practice of black magic in India. These are, however, indigenous healing modalities that many still practice in my community. But for the longest time, I did not want to write autofiction. I'm a social person, but I'm also a very private person. For such a person, writing autofiction that demands the kind of unflinching, at times confessional, honesty is quite tough. We also live in a world where when you write a memoir, people try to prove that you are a liar. It happened to a friend of mine who wrote a memoir. When you write autobiographical fiction, people try to pinpoint which part of this might be true and create more trouble. The definition of autofiction is also a Pandora's box, or as old people say, a beehive. If you tap on it, the vengeful bees will follow you, even if you hide behind a mosquito net. So knowing all that, I should have avoided this literary beehive and maintained a peaceful life. But I'm a fiction writer. Only trouble is interesting to me. In creative writing classes, we call it conflict. In the drafts of my students' stories, I look for conflict everywhere. Hence, I am trying to talk about autofiction and looking for more trouble. In the last few years, two events took place that pushed me towards trying to explore this style of writing. The first event was a personal tragedy. In 2020, during the pandemic, I lost my younger brother. He was only 33. I grew up disliking him, sometimes hating him, and later when I was in college, loving him, or so I thought. He had mental illness, and he also had a substance abuse disorder. Growing up with him was hard for the young me. Why my brother? Why my family? I would spend hours wondering. But I have realized that if he hadn't been who he was, I would have never become a writer. When he played havoc in the house during his episodes, I locked myself up and wrote love stories. Writing became my escape. I left home at the age of 18 to get away from him so that I could follow my passion, writing, reading, writing. When he died in 2020, I couldn't stop thinking about the complicated relationship I shared with him. Did he know that he was loved? Or was it a form of pity that transmuted into love only after he transitioned into another dimension? I couldn't go to his funeral because India was under lockdown. In 2016, I had lost my mother, and losing him was another gut punch. Our small family became smaller. His physical absence made me want to write about him, made me want to tell his story in his honor. And then one fine day, I logged onto Twitter. And as it happens on this website, a memoirist was imparting knowledge through a thread. We should write what we most fear, the thread said. It resonated with me. So profound. Twitter is not all that bad, I thought. I will write a memoir because I don't want to write autofiction. It is a beehive, remember? But every time I started to write, I failed because I had only written fiction all my life. I like having control over the situations and the story. How can I write about my life when I don't find it interesting? If I heighten the drama, create a situation to make a point, it will become fiction, isn't it? While this made me respect memoirists much, much more, it also made it clear to me that I'm definitely not one. So I tried to return to the literary beehive. But much before tapping on it and releasing the fiery bees, all the squabbles that people in the Northern Hemisphere have been indulging about the definition of autofiction start buzzing in my head. Is autofiction simply autobiographical fiction? What is the difference between autofiction and fiction that uses autobiographical material? Some said autofiction writers simply don't want to take responsibility. Another critic said autofiction is so patriarchal, don't write it. I was paralyzed with fear. I was late to the party, and the party was already divided into various groups of drunk people. Troubles and more troubles. Then I thought one day, how about I don't attend this party at all? Who are the autofiction writers in Assamese, my mother tongue? This information did not provide me much respite because both the authors got into some serious trouble for writing autofiction. The first author who comes to mind is Indira Goswami, a memoirist and an autofiction writer who wrote in the Assamese language about radical, transgressive women who often worked as a literature professor in Delhi University and wrote fiction on the side. Goswami's novels inspired generations of women writers in India, but also made her the subject of a wide range of puerile and salacious speculations by her contemporaries and readers simultaneously. Pages Stained with Blood, one of her most widely translated novels, is set against the anti-Sikh pogrom of 1984 that followed the assassination of the Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. A subplot of the novel involves the unnamed female narrator and her friendship with an army officer who is identified as a brigadier in the novel, Brigadier Nadial. In one of the concluding chapters, the brigadier asks the narrator, I heard you have written a novel set against the Sikh riots with a character called Brigadier Nadial who makes an indecent proposal to the writer. How dare you? The novel's unnamed narrator tells the brigadier, are you the only Brigadier Nadial in this world? I can write whatever I want. I was Indira Goswami's translator, and she said this really happened to her. In the early 90s, when Assam was reeling under an insurgency, Assamese writer Dipti Datta Das was so sick that she worried she was nearing death. Her neurological condition, undiagnosed in Assam, had paralyzed her. Amid violence, her husband took her to a city in southern India called Vellore, known for its hospital during those years. On the hospital bed there, she wrote a feminist autofictional novel titled The Sun, the Moon, and the Stars, June Beli Torar Onnanyo. In 1997, it was published. She wrote this novel so that my two sons would know what it meant to overcome poverty if I don't live to tell the tale, and how she became a professor in Assam's premier college, Cotton College State University, by sheer hard work. After her novel was published in 1997, many people in her life were upset. Her brother never spoke to her again. Many slut-shamed her for her frankness. But her book received high critical acclaim from respected scholars. I know all this because Dipti Datta Das was my mother. Also a literary scholar, she knew the dangers of writing fiction as a woman. However, the work of these writers, important to me, taught me much about the craft of fiction writing. It didn't allay my fears. Instead, they heightened my doubts. In one part of the world, I'm already late to the party, and in my part of the world, the minefield has more mines, and the bees in the hive are fiercer. Eventually, it was a lore that inspired me to plunge into this project, a lore that my grandmother had told me. I'll share this story with you from memory. It is a long story, so please bear with me, but I promise it's a good story. This is because this became the final reason why I decided to poke my finger into the beehive. Once upon a time, several thousand years ago, a great poet lived. He enjoyed royal patronage from the great king, whose empire stretched far and wide. One day, a renowned painter arrived at the court. The king commissioned his favorite queen's portrait, a life-size portrait of the queen dressed in nearly translucent muslin clothes. The king called the great poet to comment on the portrait. "Isn't it lifelike? Oh, king, there's one error in this painting." Offended, the painter tossed his easel on the ground. "Not possible." The poet said, "Well, now it is accurate. When you tossed your easel, a drop of black ink fell on the queen's right thigh, completing the painting. She has a mole on that spot." The episode did not go down well with the king. Hard to say what he thought, but he sentenced the poet to death for disrespecting the queen. Years passed. One day, the teenage prince, the king's eldest son, and his favorite one too, lost his way in the forest due to a thunderstorm while hunting. He takes shelter by climbing over a large tree, hoping his bodyguards will come looking for him, but they didn't. After sunset, a large bear climbed up the tree. "Don't be scared," the bear told him. "I won't harm you. I sleep here daily. We can share the space until your people come. However, let's be friends and make a pact. Every night my sleep is disturbed by a tiger who tries to climb the tree to kill me. Why don't you sleep for the night's first half, and I guard you. Then you can look after me during the second half." During the night's first half, the tiger arrived looking for dinner. He tried to persuade the bear to push down the prince, telling him human beings couldn't be trusted. The bear refused to betray his new friend. When the bear was asleep, the tiger tried the same trick on the prince. Terrified by the tiger's rhetoric of lies and demagoguery, the prince pushed the bear from the tree. But the bear, who was in his natural habitat, held onto a branch. Furious, he slapped the prince 4 times and cursed him. "Oh, prince, may you lose your memory and your ability to speak except 4 syllables. If someone can retell you what happened tonight, my curse will be broken. But since there are no witnesses except you and me, you'll never be able to speak in your life again." The following day, the king's men found the prince sitting under the tree, a blank expression on his face. "What happened to you? Where are you? Where were you?" All the prince could say were 4 syllables, "Sa, se, ri, ma." In response to every question, "Sa, se, ri, ma." For the next few months, numerous healers arrived from numerous parts of the world. No one could break the curse. One day, when all the medicine men and the healers had given up, an officer in the royal court asked the dejected king, "Oh, king, a woman from my extended family is visiting from another city. She says she would like to give it a try." The woman arrived in a palanquin, clad in a sari, her face behind a veil. She observed the prince for a while. "How are you?" she asked. "Sa se ri ma," he said. She paused. There was pin-drop silence in the court. What was she going to do? Could she do something that no healer had achieved so far? Suddenly, the woman composed a poem on the spot and recited it. The poem started with Sa. Rich in imagery and inventive language, the Sanskrit poem narrated the story of a prince who was lost in a thunderstorm. "How are you?" she asked the prince. "Se ri ma." The court started to buzz with the sound of hope, happiness, and horror. On the spot, she composed another poem, this time narrating what happened next: the friendship pact, the tiger, the bear, the bear's refusal to give up to the tiger's rhetoric of lies. Even the prince had not witnessed some parts of what she narrated in the poem, as she was asleep on the bear's lap. This time, when she asked how the prince was doing, he only uttered "Rima," a wave of disbelief in the courtroom. The woman did not stop her on-the-spot poetry production. She went on to compose a poem starting with "Re" and finished narrating the story of the night in the forest by composing a fourth poem starting with "Ma," and reminded the prince about the bear's curse. "O prince, how cowardly also it is to push someone to death while asleep." The prince regained his memory and his ability to speak. He was now filled with remorse for betraying the bear. The king was thrilled, but is unable to believe what he just saw. "Oh, lady, you remain inside the four walls of the household. How did you know what happened inside the forest, far away from this country, in the middle of the night?" The woman stepped out of the palanquin, slender and tall. Her face was still behind the veil. "O king, not all kinds of truth must be witnessed to be known. I know exactly what happened that night, because even though I'm a housewife, I'm also a poet. I have the gift of imagination and insight of empathy. I know exactly what happened to the prince without being there in the forest. Poets and writers see things differently. Poets and writers can see things that others cannot." So how did the lore of the great poet and the king and the painter become the final reason why I decided to tap into the beehive? I choose to read this story in many ways, but chiefly as a reminder of my responsibilities as a writer, an unflinching commitment to truth, even if speaking it is dangerous, even if the truth is unpleasant, uncomfortable. The great poet put himself in danger by speaking the truth when the king asked if the portrait was accurate. But he didn't shy away from his responsibility of telling the truth. As the one living, I can't forget my responsibility of telling my brother's truth. The commitment here is not to process my own grief, nor romanticize his life, not to gain closure, not to achieve comfort, but to engage in a dialogue with his conspicuously absent presence. The lore also teaches us that we should be responsible storytellers, responsible truth tellers, responsible ancestors. For in our stories are cautionary tales of survival that remind us not to give up on living and hoping, not to give up and keep the faith that the solutions for the highest good of the self and all may arrive from the most unexpected of spaces. The king uses all his means to save the prince, but the curse is broken by the most unexpected person. Before my mother passed in 2016, she told me that she was happy I would continue to write the stories she didn't. She never wrote another autofiction novel after the bitter experience of the first. She asked her publisher not to reprint the novel after its first edition sold out in a month. My project is my attempt to be a good ancestor and archive these stories as well. When the woman accessed the true story behind the prince's disability, she was able to break the curse. This teaches us that truth, however unpleasant, eventually has healing powers. When we encounter an unpleasant truth, we should wait before responding. Otherwise, we don't know whose death sentence we would sign. Simply described, autofiction is a blend between two different genres, autobiography and fiction. They are mutually oppositional because they understand truth in different ways. Autobiography is dependent on precisely what happened. Fiction is a reconstruction of life, and there is no limit to an author's imagination. The story of the king and the great poet is further proof of that. Both genres, however, want something familiar, use the literary imagination to arrive at the truth about life. There are many aspects of my brother's life I don't know. The mode of fiction will also enable me to take the first-person narrator to situations, witness them firsthand. To access those, I don't have empirical experience to rely on. I can witness those realms through my fictional imagination, excavate those aspects of his lifetime by placing myself in those situations that no one in the family knows and can only be known through imagination. I would know because the story of the woman who composes poetry and saves the prince's lives tells us that there is no limit to an author's imagination. But it is only the precise and honest and accurate and fearless reconstruction of the truth, a truth that others can't see, can liberate us from curses, shackles, oppressive structures, and dictators. Hence, we must always look at unconventional voices, stand next to someone who thinks differently, embrace the unfamiliar, and usher in the uncomfortable. But the story is not over yet. The king is still in disbelief. Is it possible for a human being to know the truth without witnessing it? The woman takes a step closer to the king and says, I know what happened with the prince on that stormy night, even though I wasn't there. In the same way, the great poet who you sentenced to death knew that there is a mole on the right thigh of the queen without violating her privacy. The woman walks to the king and removes her veil to reveal that she is none other than the great poet in disguise. A subject of the court bribed the executioner and kept the poet in hiding for all these years. Thank you. I'll read from the opening chapter of my novel, and it is edited to fit into the time frame. It is much longer than that. My brother and the fortune tellers, chapter 1. My brother passed away on March 31st, 2020. He was 33 years old. Since the death takes place during the coronavirus pandemic and the Indian lockdown, I can't go home to grieve with my family. I'm an immigrant to Georgia in the United States. Being unable to go after losing a loved one at home has always been my worst nightmare. And now it has come true. When my father calls me from India with the news, I have just finished meeting 2 students on Zoom. My father never calls me because I ring him daily to ask customary questions. How are you? Did you take your medicine? Did you get your quarterly blood tests done? Have you eaten? So I'm surprised by his call. Your brother is gone, he tells me. I chuckle. What do you mean he's gone? No, I mean he's no more. I sit back on my wooden chair. What nonsense. We just returned from the hospital. He speaks in a deadpan but hurried tone in short sentences. The doctor said he was brought in dead. I'm quiet. There is something wrong with the entire world. The house is wrong. This moment is wrong. Everything is wrong. It takes me around 15 days to digest the news and for acceptance to sink in. I'm not convinced because it feels like 15 years. One evening on the 16th day, I get flashes of images from the past. A tall man, a smell of fried eggplant fritters in a chickpea flour batter, long white beard, a lot of smoke, and a sound of ancient Sanskrit chants. I pause because a shock like an electric current runs through my spine. It is the fortune teller who told our family almost 20 years ago that my brother's life would be full of misfortunes, suffering, and short-lived. I was only 17. I never believed him, but so many things he predicted have come true that I retract my opinion. He wasn't the only fortune teller who told us that. When my brother is 10, our family leaves our house on the outskirts of the city to live in a rented apartment in the heart of the city. It is a gated colony of government-owned apartments for people who work for the national radio station where my father is an employee. Though located in the busiest part of the city, the campus is wide, green, and shady with flowering trees. We resent our parents for uprooting us from a large house with a large compound by a large body of water where we used to fish during the free time. My father tells us that it is hard for him to commute from the outskirts of the city every day. Those were also the days when a rebel group was trying to secede our state from India and bombing government establishments, causing shutdowns and fueling protest marches. It was desirable to live in a protected compound next to the office. Now I suspect that this uprooting played a major role in exacerbating his mental health, because when my brother turns 13, he tries to do shocking things that no one in our family has ever done. As if he wants to try everything forbidden as an expression of protest for uprooting him from the familiar life on the outskirts of the city and separating him from the childhood friends there. He skips school to spend the day in a slum where he becomes friends with addicts who inhale dendrite adhesive to get high. He goes to watch how people are cremated in the open cremation ground and befriends the person in charge of a person who must crack open the skulls of corpses with a strong rod to ensure that the body is burned to the finish. At school, he shouts as a teacher, wrestles with classmates, and doesn't complete his homework. At home, there are daily debates and a tense atmosphere. He's so angry during those debates that his nose flares up, eyes become bloodshot, and he starts using cuss words that make us cover our ears or hide somewhere in shame. It is hard to believe it is the same person. It is hard to imagine where he must have learned these words, words that no one in our family knew. I stopped practicing my Indian classical music in the mornings. The harmonium is covered with dust, and roaches make a nest inside its air valves. Finally, my parents take him to a child therapist. Once he starts talking to the specialist every evening, he returns home and makes a list of what is good in him on a ruled notebook. This isn't quite fun for a boy who is barely a teenager, but we hope for good days. The mornings are quieter. I kill the roaches and play the harmonium. I wake up at 5 in the morning to sing morning rags. I love Rag Bhairav, which is a somber tone. It's my favorite rag. There is no places for roaches in this image. No places for noise or sorrow, only new beginnings. Sometimes when I wake up early, I love the morning so much that I walk barefoot on a patch of cold, dew-wet Kutch grass. One morning there is pandemonium at home. My brother refuses to go to the therapist. The reasons are she asks me too many questions, she makes me feel guilty. Now my parents and brother negotiate as I watch quietly. The negotiations soon turn into intense debates. Nobody wants to adjust. Like three sworn enemies locked in a prison, they say hurtful things to each other for long hours until it is time for school and to go to the office. At the end of the shouting match, my brother agrees to see other specialists. He meets them once or twice before refusing to meet them for a second or third time. He has different reasons. In the city of 1 million and a bit more, there are other therapists. We don't care anymore about highly recommended or recommended. We just follow the names and addresses. We don't lose hope. We are now therapist stalkers. The small 2-bedroom apartment doesn't have ventilators above the windows. The walls are short. For fresh air to come in, the windows must be left open. But for some reason, even though the apartment is filled with smoke today, we aren't allowed to open the windows. It is warm indoors, and there are many guests in the house running from one corner to another. A lot of food is prepared in the kitchen: khichdi, salad, tomato chutney, pakoras, eggplant fritters, mixed vegetables. The dining room is cleared entirely, consecrated, and a fire is lit. The tall, light-skinned man with bright eyes and a long beard looks exactly like Albus Dumbledore from the Harry Potter movies. He's sitting next to the fire and chanting Sanskrit verses. Occasionally, he tosses things into the fire made of a heap of mango branches and twigs on a large earthen pot. He doesn't have a booklet. He's chanting in deep baritone from memory. The man is both scary and awe-inspiring in his crane white clothes and Dumbledore beard. We are coughing, but no one dares complain. Someone has told my mother that conducting this special fire ritual would be good for my brother. It would make the blessings of the Mother Goddess rain not only on his forehead, but also on our lives forever. This Mother Goddess is a special kind of deity who is often angry, but when she's happy, she's very happy. So happy that if you ask for milk, she will give you pudding. We want all the pudding. My parents have an ambivalent relationship with religion, but we have been so broken that they agree. We have tried everything. Why not try this? After all, we trace our roots to a region called Mayong in our state, Assam, which is the land of Tantra and Mantra practice. Mayong, a cluster of villages about an hour away from the city, is where my grandmother is from. Later, after the priest leaves, soak yellow lentils, marigold flowers, matchsticks, and torn banana leaves mottle our floor. My father, beginning to clean the house, says he knew all the verses by heart, clearly impressed. My father wrote his PhD dissertation on the mother goddess and the ritual of human sacrifice in Assam, until that custom was banned by the British colonizers. My father knows most of the Sanskrit chants by heart and chants them for fun. He approaches these texts the same way he would analyze Paradise Lost or Portnoy's Complaint. But my mother has a different story to share about the person who conducted the ritual. First, she corrects us that he isn't a priest, but a psychic. He was only doing us a favor. He's a well-known tantric who only practices fortune-telling to help people, often for a nominal fee. She pauses a bit. This is his hobby. Knowing his background information renders him enormous credibility, and we are keen to know what he told my mother. He was so moved by a brother's story, she says, wiping her face. There are droplets of sweat on her mouth. She pushes open the window for fresh air to come in. The 19-year-old black and white television set is next to her. He said he could tell us who did this. Who did what? My father is surprised. Someone. Ma pauses after saying that word as if it is hard to pronounce and needs time to say it aloud. Someone did something to my son. This man believes this is a spell, some kind of bad, evil energy work. Haven't we tried everything? The best doctors in the country? Then why isn't he getting any better? This is a mystery. And what do you need to get rid of that bad, evil energy? My father is quick to respond in a slightly mocking tone. Ma ignores him. They ignore certain things about each other to maintain domestic peace. It is a kind of wisdom gained after sharing a life for so long to know what to ignore and when not to engage. They both do this, and perhaps that is why it is a successful marriage. Probably this is also a kind of love. He told me that we should visit his house. I'll have to take 3 things with me. And how much is he charging you for this? My father's sarcasm is evident, dismissive, and bristling. Ma ignores that too. This is the day when Ma will ignore everything. On most days, it is my mother who speaks, and my father remains silent. I used to think he was silent because he was scared of her. It took me another 10 years to understand it is also love. All he needs me to bring is 1 rupee, she sighs. But he also wants an acorn flower, mild lavender-colored blooms that grow in shrubs that have pear green leaves, heavy and thick like those mature rubber plants. This is the first thing the fortune teller wants my mother to collect, and the leaves have to be plucked on a Saturday at dawn. My parents walk around the woody, shady campus looking for those leaves on Friday night. The other requested items, a bottle of ghee and a packet of black salt, are easy to find. I'm 16. I'm both surprised and intrigued. I also want to stop them, but I know it won't work. Even my parents are doing this with immense hesitation. What are we going to do with all this information? I ask. I don't know, my mother sighs. Perhaps I want to know what kind of a person would do this to a kid, she says, trembling. But she's struggling between reason and unreason, science and tradition, education and superstition, embarrassment and confusion. The man who looked like Dumbledore lives in a neighborhood called Happy Villa. Colorful houses with petite gardens guarded by dogs. Many of these houses face the river that have terraces to enjoy the breeze it creates. Bougainvillea often shed the front yards. Bougainvillea flowers are weird. If you touch them, it feels like as if you are touching paper. In a sense, they seem real through their fakeness. I guess the belief in sorcery and fortune-telling also works like that on the human mind, the unrealistically real. The man touches his long beard as he tells my mother, speaking in a low voice and unhurried pace, a few things to remember if you want to find out who did this. He shuts his eyes as if visualizing something. He pauses often. Sandalwood incense is burning in the poorly lit room. Unruly boy, a boy who is now a success story, a boy who is older than your younger son. He presses his eyes and the lids turn to creases as he starts to murmur. Parents, very tall father, very short mother, something sweet. It has been fed to your son with a spell cast on it, served by a low-income job holder. A low-ranking employee has served the food. This employer can be a man or a woman, but must have protruding front teeth. Ma wipes her tears before saying, I can't think about anyone like that. A lot of what the man says is unbelievable, that my brother's mental health challenges are because of someone's deliberate conspiracy. It isn't easy to digest. There is some consolation in accepting illness, but not in induced harm. They live in your neighborhood. My visions tell me they know your family well. But what did they do? Father asks, because Ma is so choked up. Why would someone do this to my child? She repeatedly murmurs, her red eyes filling up. Something sweet. They have fed your son something sweet, where a spell is cast. This has changed his behavior. It is a powerful transfer of energy. There was another boy who had gone unruly due to the spell, and to erase the spell in that boy, they transferred it to your son. This other boy must be the son of the couple, tall husband, short wife. We can't think of anyone, my father says, perhaps not ready to accept that one of our neighbors could cast a spell on my brother. I don't know anyone with the description who would want to harm us. Dumbledore Beard is unmoved. People do strange things when it comes to protecting their children. He says, keeping aside the bottle of ghee and acorn leaves. This is just unbelievable. Ma whispers. The man's voice softens. I wouldn't lie to you. I double-checked during my session. What I said is true. You don't have to tell me who this couple is, but let me know if you would like me to cast a spell on these leaves. He pauses, but when he finds both of them wearing surprised looks, he explains he would dip the ghee on the leaves, heat them in a flame, and cast a spell. If my parents would like to heal my brother, they would have to bring these leaves in contact with his skin for a few seconds, and then find another household where another young boy lives and throw it in their courtyard. The energy will transfer to their house, and the boy in that house would start showing similar symptoms. There is silence in the room. Ma is astonished. She has to make a decision that may heal her child, but at the expense of another. After a few minutes, she breaks down, inconsolable. Are you okay? We ask her. We ask her again. When she's better, she says, I want my son to be okay. And I don't know if these spells and all are true, but I can't wish this on another mother. I don't want another mother to go through this. Give me another way that doesn't need me to wish ill on another family. Dumbledore Beard is looking straight at my mother's face with a compassionate look. He also seems helpless and speaks in a resigned tone. There is no other way, unfortunately. There are millions of ways to harm in this world, but few are good. I respect your wish, but listen to me. This is a strong spell. The energy summoned from the world of spirits and sounds is so strong, and in a few years it'll start corroding your family. I have no assurances for you, except that the family who did this to your family would also never get peace. It is the cost they have to pay for agreeing to do this to another child. She joins her hands in respect. And why did you ask me to do this if there is a cost? Because that's what many people want. Your family will be walking through fire in the next few decades, but like gold, you will emerge stronger, brighter. I can't say that about your younger son. After parking our Fiat Padmini car in the garage, my parents cooked dinner. Their foreheads have creases and their eyes a lost look. They call Pompey Auntie, who has lived in our neighborhood longer, knows more stories and family secrets. My brother is already asleep. He must have eaten leftovers. The four of us sit down on a living room couch. Who is this couple? We discuss. My parents are eager to prove the psychic wrong, but Pompey Auntie asks after a long debate, can you repeat what the fortune teller said? The exact words, please. She holds my mother's hand. Deepti Baido, before you all moved into this neighborhood, the only son of the Sharmas was giving them quite a hard time, just like your son. They believed that someone had cast a spell and consulted a tantric healer. I hear. These are unconfirmed reports, but I have seen the 16-year-old lying on the road, smeared with mud, completely drunk after consuming moonshine. We all have seen it, believe me. Then her eyes well up. How could the Sharmas do this? Impossible. The loudest protest is from my father. He had known the Sharmas before his wedding for many years. Sharma Auntie is short, bob-cut hair, bright eyes with thick eyebrows shaped like bows. She has a lovely and kind voice. She's generous, popular, beautiful, smart, and short. Her husband, honestly, is very tall. So tall that he walks with a hunch and reminds me of coconut trees. Pompey Auntie murmurs. They are the ones the psychic is referring to. Finally, she nails the matter. During our early months in this neighborhood, the Sharmas needed to hire a cook. Sharma uncle was recovering from his surgery, and the family needed an extra hand. The cook has protruding front teeth, Pompiante says. All boxes checked. Unruly son, who is now a success story. Tall husband, short wife, low-ranking employee, protruding front teeth. Suddenly there is so much silence in the room, and I find my brother standing afar. He's wearing a black vest and ash-gray bermudas. We hold our breath. Did he hear us talking? Is it true? He asks. I'm like this because someone wanted to harm me? No one can answer that question, but after a long silence, Ma does. 2 decades later, mourning him in the United States, when the world is under lockdown due to the pandemic, I exactly remember what Ma told him in reply, because it was Ma whose depression would take such a toll on her health in the next 2 decades that she would eventually die 2 years before turning 60. Because it was Ma who would try for the next 2 decades to help him by visiting fortune tellers, sorcerers, psychics, and my father would support her, though he was an atheist and a rationalist who had married Ma in the early 80s because she was also a rebellious atheist, rationalist, a brave woman who slept on the part of the oil tankers during an oil blockade movement in the state. One of the many movements that my state has witnessed since India's independence in 1947, demanding self-determination. It was Ma who would find out from one of her friends about a woman who was possessed every morning by a goddess, enabling her to see the past, present, and future. She didn't look at our faces when we visited her, but she said that someone had done dangerous energy work on my brother. She was the first fortune teller who would repeat what the bearded man told us. It was Ma who would force my father in the coming years to take her to the sorcerers in Mayong, our ancestral village, land of sorcerers, my grandmother's home, where you would meet old psychic men and women who had never met us before, but would tell the story of a tall husband, a short wife, a woman, or a man with protruding front teeth. It was Ma who would be so depressed due to my brother's escalating mental health, his bleak future, that my concerned friend Rizwana and her mother would force her out of bed to take her to the temple of the Hindu goddess Kali, where the priest would bring a man who was born on a Tuesday. To conduct the ritual that will tell us what happened in the past, the priest would ask the man to take off his shirt, turn around to expose his back, where a steel dish will automatically stick to reveal the story of a tall man and a short wife, and sweets fed to my brother. It was Ma who would eventually find the man she believed had unwittingly cast a spell on my brother, because she found out from Pompiante that the Sharmas had gone to him for help many, many years ago. She would call this man Abbajan because he would treat her like a daughter. Abbajan was a school teacher who knew all the Sanskrit verses by heart, worshipped the goddess Kali in the Hindu cremation ground every Saturday night after midnight, wearing only ash on his skin to invite bodiless entities to force them to work for him. Ma would visit Abbajan for many years, but none of those entities would be able to save my brother because Abbajan could not neutralize his own magic spell. Or so people say. There was no way to confirm from the Sharmas if they fed the charm sweets to my brother, except that he once told us the Sharmas, our neighbor Sharmas, had approached Abbajan seeking help for his son who had lost their way. And there are so many more. The man from Nepal, another man who wore his wife's sari when he was possessed by one of the mother goddesses, this one a less angry one, often happy, and others. My brother and my mother, warriors against magic spells and unknown sorcerers, are no more. In their absence, only I can tell their story, because my father never will. However, that evening, when my brother asked if what he heard was true, my mother said, I don't believe in any of this. People say all kinds of things. You're sick, and you'll be okay if you take your meds regularly. I believed her. There was not a trace of doubt in my mind that my brother would be all right. His name was Maina, and this story is about him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aruni, for that glorious presentation and letting us get a glimpse into the novel that you're working on.
Thank you.
I want to just share some of the gifts before I start with the questions. So you started by telling us that you descend from a tradition rich with healing modalities and inviting us to understand that writing is one of them. And you created a wonderful shift. You talk about the grief that is behind, or the source of this story, but you didn't stand there and give us a talk on writing and personal grief. You are thinking about writing as a process of engaging a dialogue with an absent presence. And with the discussion of lore and the beautiful counter logic that's alive within that tradition, you also give us a sense that by listening and telling stories, we can save one another. And so I feel like those are really wonderful gifts to start with, and to think about your practice as a writer, which is also deeply invested in public history and political life. So thank you for that.
That's a great recap and great observations. And thank you so much for engaging with me.
Oh, what a gift. What an honor as well. I'm going to try and be cool with the technology in my lap, which is a little bit befuddling to me. There's a moment toward the end of the excerpt that you shared where the narrator says, "What are you going to do with this information?" And that feels like such a powerful question to land in the space of a family. But I also kind of want to start with a version of that same question. So this story is something that you've lived with and that you've processed, that you're turning toward and that you found yourself turning away from. You've also written a short story version that picks up part of this story, Busy Colony.
Yes.
And so I guess I want to ask a little bit. I know as a writer that our material is grounded in questions and stories, characters, and obsessions that we have that do not go away. But I wonder what some of the motives and strategies and wishes are that you find yourself using in mining this material now as the story continues. And I don't know how much of it has been completed, if that's going to be most of what your Radcliffe year is about, but.
Yes, thank you so much. Great observations. And again, all of these questions are actually encouraging me to plunge more into the project, just lock myself up and write. My grandmother was a healer. She was called a bez, and she used to treat people who got sick in the village. My father's elder brother was also a bez, and he used to do the same. But of course, Mayong is a cluster of several villages where my grandmother is from. And different healers do different things. Some of them are busy with entity removal, some of them are busy with snake bites, some of them work with ghosts, some of them work with divination techniques. So all of this, but for a long time I was asked to not engage with this because my parents were atheists. When my brother's mental illness was really serious, they tried everything and they started verging towards, especially my mother, verging towards going back to the belief systems that she thought sustained her generations, and she thought that her modern education had denied and taken her away from. Mm-hmm. So she decided, I want to go back to these things that has sustained us for generations. Let me see what I get there, and I'll also continue the modern medical treatment as well. So all of these techniques. When I'm writing this, I actually, in the summer, I went to Assam and collected a lot of materials, a lot of books that are locally published but not really available, which are mostly about the divination techniques. I also spoke to a lot of people because the village still exists and there are people who still practice those things. Mm-hmm. And that was very useful. And all of these has given me quite a lot of raw material to work with. But at the same time, I discuss only one incident with a fortune teller in this chapter, mm-hmm. But I'm arranging each chapter with an encounter with different fortune tellers and how they impact our lives in different ways. Because along with my parents, I went to so many of them actually. And each of those were different, each of those told us different things, but there was this common set of images they kept on referring to, which was the most astonishing thing. And that is what I'm trying to understand. Where were they drawing from? Mm-hmm. How did they know about these few set images that kept on coming back again and again? Is there something called the collective unconscious? Is there something that science has not been able to explain, that has sustained indigenous communities for so long? Is it just placebo? I don't know. And I don't think I'm very interested in also solving those questions, and I don't think I would be presumptuous that I'll be able to solve those questions, but I think in a way I want to acknowledge that these belief systems can coexist because for thousands of years it has sustained life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a little bit when you mentioned the collective unconscious, you talk about the fictional imagination, and I think of fiction in the hands of a writer like you as a kind of technology that allows us to move forward and backward through logic, through time, through lives, through silences. And so I wonder, are there techniques that are emerging from this other vocabulary that are landing as tools for you in fiction?
That's a great question. I think the other vocabulary is enabling me to surrender logic in the most conventional sense, and surrender to my imagination, and not worry too much about what we understand as reality. Anything that I'm able to access while I'm writing, I think I'm using it and I think it is useful. Of course, the editing process is completely different, as we all know. But I am starting to trust my instincts much more than I used to. I think we all have gone through MFA programs, so we are told to be suspicious of certain things, and I'm trying to unlearn those things. Because writers are here, we publish, we take writing in a professional way, but actually eventually we are all storytellers, and storytellers have existed in our communities for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm most interested in what these storytellers use in order to tell a persuasive, convincing story, a story that is true and unpleasant, as I spoke about. Even if it is unpleasant, even if it is hard, it is, I think, our duty to go and tell the story. So what I'm learning through this process is actually what Marquez used to say, I'm trying to tell stories the way my grandmother used to tell stories, by suspending this so-called disbelief that people have for strange things. I know people call it magic realism and all of it, and I'm not prickly about the term, but I think this is how our communities have thought for many, many, many years, much before modernity came, and it has helped them and not helped them, but it has sustained life for all these years. That's what is most exciting to me. How did they do? What did they do? How did they sustain? And that's what I'm trying to excavate more and more.
It's exciting because it's also a way of reinvigorating an art form whose vocabulary is really grounded in terms of mastery, terms of the ego, let's face it,
yes.
And fear. Suspicion, I think, has a lot to do with the fear.
Yes.
And so that feels really, really beautiful. Also, even the way that you framed your own decision to embrace autofiction as one that had to be grounded in dismissing some of the hang-ups of a Western imagination of what autofiction is, what it's hamstrung by, and turning to these other models, one from whom you literally descend. That feels like a kind of invitation to other writers. I know we both teach young writers, but to say what is the inheritance you claim, and how will you make it useful and challenging for yourself?
And there's a lot of debate about autofiction that in the West, especially, or as I said, the Northern Hemisphere. This is a phrase I borrow actually from Mario Vargas Llosa, who wrote an essay in 1977 called "The Social Commitment of the Latin American Author," where he talks about how writers from the Northern Hemisphere are not forced to socially commit. People can choose to be literary artists, but he also maintains that, and I agree with him, that writers from the margins have to have some social commitment. So one of the critiques of autofiction is that it is navel-gazing to some extent. There is a lot of, it is very individualistic. But when I'm reading autofiction written by writers from South Asia, not all of them, but the writers who I mentioned at least, there's a very strong social vision, social critique, social commitment. It is definitely anchored heavily on autobiography, but at the same time, there is a consistent critique of patriarchy, inequality, state violence that's going on. And all those Pandora's box that I was talking about, it doesn't fit in here. So I think post-colonial writers or writers from formerly colonized nations, maybe in the global south, have found, not all of them, but found probably new aesthetic partnerships, which is to borrow the best of the genre of autofiction, but at the same time make it their own, and write with a bigger social responsibility. And that's inspiring to me. And I think that's what literally I have inherited, not just from Indira Goswami, who was actually my teacher, and I became her translator of her last novel, which is a historical novel, and then my mother, who I think is my first creative writing teacher, even though she never really taught me, but I used to read her work and learned from it quite a lot, yeah.
I'm thinking of your story, Skylark Girl,
Yes.
in which the narrator is a writer who is at a literary conference, someone from the state of Assam who is, bearing witness in a different way to the fact of political violence, and that difference bothers some of the other participants. I know that thinking about political violence is a commitment within your work. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the pressures and some of the revelations that...
Sure, thank you so much for reading it. It is one of my favorite stories, actually. First of all, I wanted to write Skylark Girl also because when I was young and I was in college, I started writing, and editors would ask me to give me a story set in Northeast India or Assam, and if I send them a story that is domestic in nature or a retelling of a folk tale, they would reject it. And they often said, I like your story, but I want something about the political violence. And that was very surprising to me, and I didn't have the language to deal with. When I grew up, I started thinking about it, that actually, first of all, there is so much erasure, so much misrepresentation, and at the same time, we are expected to perform in a certain way to the needs of the bigger so-called gaze, And I don't know how to name this gaze, but it's a kind of gaze that forces us to behave in a certain way, write in a certain way. Only this is going to work, that is not going to work. It can be political, but it cannot be too political. It cannot be too critical of India. It can be also a little bit critical of India. So, but I write in 2 languages. So when I write in Assamese, none of these things matter, because I'm talking to an audience that is only able to read in that language. But when I'm writing in English, all of these things come, So it has been, in a way, engaging with political violence is important to me because my family members have suffered. My uncle's best friend was actually killed right, they were sitting next to each other in a shop, and then he was just shot dead. And that's why my uncle never was the same. And there are many, many, many examples of how each family in Assam suffered because of the insurgency. So I want to engage with it. I want to engage with the state violence. I want to engage with the militarization and the enormous amount of untold horrible stories that has happened. But at the same time, I also refuse to be straitjacketed in that way. And I think that writers from marginal traditions and communities are often considered as informers of a certain kind of, they will bring some news, but we are not seen as literary artists. So in a way, to write in different styles and genres and topics and resist that is to assert my sovereignty as an artist, because if I'm coming from a state where sovereignty is so vexed, Assam tried to secede from India, first and foremost I can do is establish my artistic sovereignty by writing whatever hell I want.
Oh, that's beautiful. Questions are coming in. I'm curious, writes this attendee, if your brother ever shared his understanding of how or why he became different, and when and how do we blame ourselves as mothers? There's that painful choice that the mother in the passage you read is given. We can resolve this quickly, but it's going to inflict the same pain on someone else. How can retelling a shared narrative with some mystery lead to healing or not?
I think my mother did blame herself, and every time she blamed herself, my father said, just tell that I was a horrible father, Don't, because he knew that women are blamed all the time, right? And so anytime she blamed herself, she said, no, don't say that, tell them that I was a horrible father, I didn't bring him up well. But the truth is that he was ill, and when I was growing up in the 90s, there was not even now, it is the conversation about mental health is so nil almost in India. During those times, it was almost a stigma. Even my mom. I mean, I resented the fact that she wouldn't let me talk about it with my friends because she was worried that people would I don't know how they will look at her. It's a taboo. She didn't tell any of her colleagues, and I think that because she would have probably been healthier and happier probably if she could share. She was herself ashamed of it constantly. I don't know if there's going to be healing. He's no more, right? Also, I do understand storytelling can be healing, but at the same time, I think grief it doesn't go away. It's like managing. You know how to deal with it. It just stays with you forever, right? And we have to accept those things that grief never really goes away. It just stays. My mom passed in 2016. I feel like it happened yesterday when I think about that. Even then, sometimes when I'm driving back in Georgia, and suddenly I would have to stop the car because memories would come in. It's like it happened yesterday. So these whole ideas of moving on, closure. I think these are different ways that we try to chase a myth. But the truth is that grief stays with us, and it's okay.
Yeah, it keeps pace with us, and like us, it changes as well.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm thinking, you're making me think of something. So there's another line from the story, or from the novel, there's consolation in accepting illness, but not in inducing harm, is what the narrative's mother says. And I was thinking that this work, what you're working on, is so useful to our participation in forms of collective harm, the violences of our lives within institutions like a nation, and to move away from the temptation to imagine that one's healing can or must come at the expense of somebody else's harm.
Yeah.
That feels really, really poignant and challenging, especially like November 2024 in this country. What archival material? You said there was some unknown archival material, never before shared archival material that you're working with. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I would talk briefly about it because I'm still, trying to make sense of that. So the novel has two timelines. In one timeline, the character is researching on the work done by a bunch of people from Boston who actually went to Assam in the 19th century to establish schools and also contribute to the education in Assam. And very few people know about this. And some of those archives are actually in the library here at Radcliffe, Slajinger Library. But because he is not able to, he hasn't gone to Assam for the character for the longest time, his research remains stunted for many, many years. But something happens in the plot of the novel that he actually has to go. And as a result of that, he is able to reconstruct the life of these people that he was researching on. So he's an academic. He goes to Assam to research on this topic. And that topic, some of the archives are here. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll have to stay tuned for that. I could talk to you all day, but it's already time to read the closing remarks. So I want to thank you for just a really wonderful presentation, and thank our audience for attending and for terrific questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of them, but I hope that you will be able to join us for other Radcliffe virtual programs, and you can find that schedule as well as videos of past events at radcliffe.harvard.edu. And thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you for your marvelous work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.